and then spent 20 years approximately at Willamette University in academics, and then came to the college in 2017, I believe, as the Dean of the Faculty, and is here to speak on a subject that he told me about just minutes ago, and now I've forgotten what it was. So he did not have a topic for his speech. He was just going to talk. So so he's ready to go, and I'm ready to get down.
Thank you for that warm welcome, Jim. I appreciate it. Actually, it's a much nicer introduction than I generally receive. A couple of corrections necessarily. I did my doctoral work back east, not a second master's. Oh, no. Not that that's important. And I was at Willamette a lot longer. You've taken about 7 years off my life, and I want to say thank you for that. You made me a younger transfer than I actually am. I was at Willamette for 27 years. And the only important thing to say about that, I'll get to in a moment, about having come up through the ranks as a professor, you never quite lose the snarky attitude of entitlement and I know better than you that you have as faculty. And so that'll explain a lot as we go on over the course of the next half hour. And speaking of a half hour, my role here is not as faculty primarily. The presidents are kind enough to endure my service as Dean of the Faculty and Vice President for Academic Affairs. And I get asked once a day what that means, what is it that I actually do on campus. And I've tried to come up with a way I could capture it and really convey it to you simplistically so it'd be just less complicated than it otherwise be. And it seems to me that it bears a lot of resemblance, a similarity, if you will, to being a caretaker at a graveyard. In the sense that I have a lot of people under me and none of them listens to a thing I say. I'm also mindful of the fact that we have only about half an hour in front of us, and I want to make sure that I'm not exceeding my allotment of time. Barry was kind enough to chat with me a little bit about what I might speak on, and he suggested that the peak curriculum was really an interesting topic for us, but that I could wander a bit afield if I chose to. And of course, I took that bit in my teeth immediately and decided that we should really talk about the broader enterprise of education, and I'll do my best to aim eventually toward the peak curriculum and what's new at the College of Idaho in terms of what students are learning in the classes. So we'll achieve relevancy if we're lucky, but I'd like to start with quite a different topic. And that is what it is you learn in college, because I think that you in this room are uniquely situated given the perspective of so many years since you graduated. What's been valuable? What has not been valuable? What are the parts worth keeping? What are we trying to achieve in higher ed? And by this, I don't mean just a philosophical meandering about the value of education generally. I mean very specifically. These are troubling times. I was thinking this morning about the things that stand out in my memory over the course of even the last few days that have come through the news or that stuck with me over the last few months. And it struck me that these are some of them. So I would say the rising mistrust. I attended a gathering back in DC a little bit ago, and they chatted about the rise of fake news and the decay of trust in institutions of all types, not least news media, but also in politics and leaders in society, politicians in particular. Also, I think these recent events have just catalyzed our thinking about violence in the world. Only recently, feels like a moment ago, we received word of 50 folks gunned down while at prayer in New Zealand before the echo has even diminished of the last event in Pittsburgh in which 11 people were killed while in prayer. And then you think back to the events in Norway. In fact, this morning only I received yesterday's news, you probably caught it on par, in Amsterdam, that thriving metropolitan, cosmopolitan city, 11 people were shot on a tram, of whom 3 died. So it just seems like, I'm reminded in my thinking of the work of Yeats and the poem that he wrote in the wake of World War I. You'll remember it, I'm sure, his passage from the Second Coming was, "Things fall apart, the sinner cannot hold. The ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity." And so as I contemplate our current situation and the things that fail, institutions that have grown untrustworthy, or for whatever reason we no longer have the investment we once might have had, I cast my mind's eye across the terrain and think, well, what's the cure for this ailment? It's a societal ailment, so it's got to be a societal cure. And the answer that I come quickly to, maybe too easily to, is education. Because from my way of thinking, education is exactly the solution to the problem that we confront. And I know in this country, we've tended to think of higher education, especially on an individual level. That is, you go to college to earn a living, to secure your future, to do better, to raise your station, to secure your interests, get a job, hold a job, make sure that you're securing your children's future, maybe that of your relatives, your partner, rather than thinking about it as an engine of citizenship. And I would like to be clear in making the jump from individual benefit to collective benefit that it is absolutely the case that college education is the single most important investment that one can make in their economic future by comparison to anything else, including taking the same equivalent of cash and investing it in a mutual fund. There is no other investment one can make compared to higher ed. There are so many studies that derive from so many different contexts indicating how true this is. The latest ones indicate that it's somewhere between about $1 million and $1.6 million, depending on whether you're looking at census data or the U.S. Department of Labor Relations or a variety of different surveys, but they located over the course of a lifetime of earnings in your career, you're likely to exceed what you would have had you only a high school diploma by somewhere in the neighborhood of between $1 million and approaching $2 million, certainly $1.5 million. And then you think of what you actually pay for college and compare those figures, and it starts to become very clear. Even if one comes out of college these days, given how much college costs, with $25,000 of debt more over the course of a lifetime, look how minuscule that is by comparison to the $1 million or $1.6 million that you will make in higher earnings capacity. But that's not what I want to talk about today. That is, the economic equation is pretty clear. It's a great investment for almost any young person today to go to college just based on the money they will earn over the course of their lifetime. The break-even point is said to be around 40 years old, just in the high 30s or 41, right in there. You're starting to earn. It's all gravy from there. Every dollar you earn is a dollar you wouldn't have earned had you stopped at a high school education or gone to college for a little while. It's really the diploma and completion that seem to propel you on to this greater height of success economically. But, as I say, it's not what I wanted to focus on in my conversation with you today. What I wanted to focus on was the societal advantage, the advantage to all of us. Because, of course, you've either gone to college or you haven't. Everybody in this room has. People in the world, some have or haven't. But by the time we pass 50 or 60, if we go back to college, it's really for our own personal growth, less than our careers in front of us. That is, I don't deny the fact that some people very late in life are still obliged to work to pay their bills and to feed themselves. But by and large, we've become the person we are. We've earned our careers over many years, and so we're looking back over our shoulder at what education might do for us. And certainly when someone like Jack Cafferty comes and knocks on your door and he seeks support for the college, I think that equation presents itself to you. What's in it for you? Are you giving back to the college that gave to you? Is it a norm of reciprocity? Is it for the greater good of society? I think it's important for you to have clarity of focus about exactly why you would support any enterprise of higher education. And the data there are very clear. That is, higher education is one of the engines of benefit to society at large for everybody who inhabits that locale. And by that I mean, in this case, Caldwell immediately, the Treasure Valley at large, the state of Idaho, and easily beyond the boundaries of the state of Idaho to the Northwest region and the country at large. And of course, uniquely to the College of Idaho, 73 countries represented, the number of our international students. We're effectively generating secular missionaries in terms of higher education, critical thinking skills, civility, peacemaking across the world, the globe, not just here in Idaho and around the countryside. We are, the saying has emerged, both the presidents and I tend to cite it. I think it came from Steve Mon originally. We are the most diverse, 55 acres in the state of Idaho, and it's not close. And I should throw in, because I have no shame about this at all, I hope you realize your college, your alma mater, is far and away the best college by almost any measure in the state of Idaho. You know that about this place. In terms of the fraction of students who are in the top percentage of their high schools who come to us, in terms of our graduation rate, in terms of our annual giving rate, we're not only number one in the state of Idaho, we're number two in the entire Northwest region. For the college the size that we are, the number of governors, the number of Rhodes Scholars, the number of Marshall Scholars, I mean, by almost any metric you'd want to come up with, College of Idaho has been an engine of civility and democracy, of leadership of all forms in private industry and nonprofit industry across the board. In fact, I had one person say to me that they couldn't get into the College of Idaho were they to apply today, and they are an alum from the College of Idaho. So they feel that their degree has grown in value over the course of the many years that have passed since they matriculated here. Well, you've seen already that my method is really circular. I'm kind of approaching my topic slowly, as it were, as if it were likely to get away from me and I were a coyote because, you know, yotes, right? So sneaking up on it. What I'm approaching this moment is a recognition that, let me give you some of the data on this because I find them compelling. This has to do with the social implications of higher education. So people with college degrees, mothers who have children who themselves own a college degree, are more likely to spend quality time with their children, teaching them social values, behaviors that turn into positive citizenship, and they themselves will produce children who participate actively in and contribute to their communities. The chances of being unemployed are 3 times higher when you don't have a college degree, if you only have a high school degree. 1 in 7 high school graduates is stuck in a part-time job with entry-level wages and very few options for full-time employment. College grads generate higher tax receipts that pay for schools and sidewalks and all the infrastructure that we enjoy. There is increased levels of public awareness about important social issues, lower unemployment, I've already mentioned, lower teen pregnancy, lower birth rates. Educated parents are more likely to raise children who themselves go on to obtain a college degree, and so the cycle continues. It improves what they report as the quality of life, their life expectancy. They live longer having gone to college. For not only for them, this is proven true in studies for their entire families. So the effect of a college degree is not just about the person who receives it and their employment opportunities, it also extends to the entire immediate family. They're also proven to be more engaged citizens. They are more measurably involved in their communities and more likely to report to understand issues of the day, and they're also more likely to vote. So the list goes on and on and on, but the empirical evidence of the generative, positive influence of college education extends, my point here, is to the entire community, not just to the people who themselves receive the degrees. So where are we going with all of this? We have received recently news from the Gallup. I met with one of the senior leaders of the Gallup organization, the polling folks, and he confirmed for me that there has been a precipitous fall in the trust that folks invest in higher education. And in 2 ways is it disturbing. First, people just don't trust colleges as much as they used to. They question the return on their investment if they're thinking of going to a college, and they also wonder if college is really doing anything good for society at large, never mind the data that I'm citing for you. And not only is it a precipitous decline in the overall level of trust, across the board, by the way, societally, it is markedly polarized in terms of politics and political position. For example, among Republicans, folks who identify themselves as being conservative on that end of the spectrum, it's overwhelmingly only 36% of people who identify as Republican or Republican-leaning inclined believe that colleges and universities have a positive impact on the country. Only just over a third, which means just about 2/3 of those folks think that it's having a negative effect on the country. And you see my point. It's not that how could they be so wrong? My point is that what has gone so awry, so amiss, that such a large percentage of our mainstream population believes that higher education is not having a beneficial effect. And again, the data are clear, no matter whether you're talking about individual earning capacity or benefit to society, and trust me, there are more data than I've cited. The benefit seems to be positive, but the belief is the opposite. It's increasingly sinking. People no longer think that higher ed is a path to success. So this is the starting place. I'm reminded of, I was introduced once, I gave a talk back east, and it was in New England, and I wish I could do a New England accent. I can't really, but the introduction said, well, this is David Douglas, and he's here to talk to us, and his job is to talk to us. Our job is to listen to him, and let's hope he finishes his job before we finish ours. So I'll do my best to move it right along. Nonetheless, this is really just the opening, because what I want to jump to eventually is what you learned at the College of Idaho and what we currently teach at the College of Idaho, but I think that I can't speak meaningfully about that without filling in just a bit of the gap. What does anyone try to do in a college education? Gosh, it would be simple if we could say we want to teach citizenship, critical thinking, problem solving. We would have classes on citizenship, critical thinking, problem solving. It doesn't turn out to work that way. You can't get there from here. It is taught best obliquely, on the bias, if you understand my meaning. That is, if we could just tell students how to be good citizens, how to have depth, vast interior space, how to prepare themselves for the challenges that will occur over the course of their lifetimes, we would. But the only way to get there from here is to do it indirectly by asking them to learn things, the utility of which or the value of which may not be immediately apparent. And over the effort, the discipline that it takes for them to deny the thing they want to do, which may be to go out and lie in the sun on a beautiful spring day, or it may be to go and be with their friends or to take a hike, they instead stay up all night long studying mathematical equations that may have zero relevance to their life at that moment. But the exercise of that personal discipline, of subordinating their desires to this greater good they may not even fully understand, turns out over time to generate the kind of diamond out of coal that we see over the course of a full life well lived. So college curriculum is never as directly connected to the outcomes that it might seem to seek as you might imagine it would be. And you can go all the way back. You know, this style of education, liberal arts education, derives, we pride ourselves, really from Plato. And from Plato, we take the name of the first academic hierarchy, the first college, at least in spirit, which is the academy. The word academus comes from a grove of trees that was a place of worship. And to the ancient Greeks at that time, just the Greeks, which were at that time a city-state, not even a nation, right? This was not the entirety of the Greek countryside as we now think it. These were people who lived in Athens, and that was it. They considered that to be their birthright, their home, and they would go out and speak with Plato and engage in what they called, dialectic, a kind of conversation, a critical, challenging conversation. And here's the scary thing. There was no set curriculum at that time. In fact, the conversation was virtually endless. His best student, many of you will know, was Aristotle. Aristotle attended the academy for 20 years. 20 years. And you say, well, he was not been very bright. and in fact, the opposite was true. They called him the reader because he would stay up late at night with a candle sputtering there, and he would read these scrolls and memorize data, and then he would arrange a bronze bowl upside down so that when he finally fell asleep, he would drop the scroll from his hand, and it would hit the bronze bowl and clatter and make a noise and wake him back up again so he could read some more. This is the curve breaker student that Aristotle was. Aristotle was the student of Plato for 20 years before he left to start his own school, the Lyceum. So he began another school, and that was the only reason he left full-time attendance at Plato's school. Do you see my point? They didn't have a set curriculum. There was no diploma. There was no set of topics. Plato did carry on at great length about education as enterprise. He said, look, you should start with music, because students don't need to understand at the earliest age the rhythms and the beauty of the aesthetic draw of music. So he was very big on music as the starting place. Then he said we should turn to understanding stories. And stories are hugely important. I'm echoing Jim, and I have strong agreement about this. Narrative is one of the ways to our hearts. Before we can understand logic, we can understand stories. That said, he was very picky about his storytellers. He believed that most storytellers and poets should be taken into the street and beaten with a stick. And I'm not making this up. Plato said it and wrote it down, and he felt that because the stories he felt were not formative. They were not wholesome. He was very particular about the kind of morals or values or lessons that should be taught inside of stories. So you start with music and you move to stories, to poetry, to understanding the world in narrative terms. And from there, one might move into the study of things like logic and philosophy. And of course, those who are familiar with Plato's Republic will remember the myth of the divided line and the cave. And through these parables or aphorisms, he would convey his sense of values, because he thought we're really not learning about the world as much as we're learning about ourselves. And that was the seed, that was the birthplace of what we now call liberal arts. And of course, even the word liberal arts from Latin, not the Greek, fine, but the tradition is it's the education that is suitable for a free person. And liberal in this case comes to us in translation as free, the free arts that are appropriate for a free person. Of course, at the time, that would have meant only men who were born in Athens, and so it was exclusive at that time in ways that are hateful to us now. But nonetheless, the seed of inclusivity, the seed of incorporation, of a life well lived above and beyond material needs. It's not just a vocation where you earn enough to feed yourself. This is for the people who vote, who make society, who lead society, who change society. So from there, how do we get all the way to the peak curriculum at the College of Idaho? We can do this together, watch, so you hang in there with me. Over the intervening centuries, the curriculum, what one should learn in college, was conceived to be, first of all, as I've already said, a kind of dialectical conversation among people, and that was it. Barry and I would sit in the morning and talk all day long, and maybe we'd take a break for food, and then he'd get tired, he'd go home, and I was like, see you tomorrow, and then he'd show back up, and it was a life lived, not just an education for a purpose. From that early classical period, which is really 5th century BC, right, a long time ago, Jump forward to probably a good place for us to stop off briefly would be 11th century, which is the origin of the University of Bologna, the first university in Europe, by many accounts the first university ever. And by university, I mean to say that it had two purposes. One was to educate students, and one was to generate new knowledge. So we see this beginning of a break where it was seen not only as a place to teach people, but also a place to generate new understanding of the world. Science, art, in all fields, generative as well as instructional. And in that period of time, they still believed that it was not so much forward-looking as backward-looking. That is, everyone learned the same stuff. It was, you would say, canonical. It wasn't the case that you would go there to study in one area versus another area. It was rather the case that everybody who came through the curriculum studied the same thing. It was very much a classical model. And that model had emerged as the 7 liberal arts. And those were initially conceived to be in a 3-part series and a 4-part series, the trivium and the quadrivium. And effectively it was thought that, well, you start with the lower division ones, and then once you master those, you move on to the upper division ones, and I'll spare you the classical translation of each of those things. Those are less important in some ways for our purpose than the fact that everybody studied the same thing. And they studied it in Latin, typically, sometimes Greek. So table stakes for education at that time, where you had to come into it with these antiquity, languages from antiquity, fluent enough to be able to read and to claim, to discourse, to present, and learn in that foreign language. Gosh. So fast forward all the way to the contemporary period, and by that I mean the late 1800s, and we find that that debate raged. In the colonial period forward, universities and colleges in this country were really predicated on the notion that everybody needed to learn the same stuff, to read the same books, read the same materials from the same instructors. When the College of Idaho was established, initially, there were exactly 2 professors, one of whom was the president of the college. Yeah, exactly. Boone was one of the first 2 professors. And do you know what they found? They could not matriculate any students into the college for 3 full years. We started in 1891, as you may know, but we didn't actually admit a single student into the collegiate curriculum for 3 years because no one was prepared. They couldn't find any students to admit. They weren't ready. They didn't speak Latin, they didn't speak Greek, they didn't have the skill sets. So they spent their first 3 years as college preparatory, the academic preparation. And they admitted students effectively in a high school curriculum to prepare them to enter into what would become the College of Idaho. But it was 12 years before the number of students in the college curriculum equaled that of the students in the high school preparatory curriculum. That's how long it took for them to exceed the number of students who were just being trained to get into the college. You see? My point is, at the very beginning, we had a very classical, very Renaissance style curriculum. Everybody studied the same thing, they all needed to know the same stuff at entry, the preparation was very consistent and canonical. And it wasn't until deep into that century, that is the 1900s, 20th century, that we started to break this open into 2 conflicting impulses. One of those impulses was what we've already described, classical, canonical, education for life. The other had everything to do with modern university style. This is derived from Harvard and Cornell, where, in fact, at Cornell at that time, late 1800s, there was almost no restriction at all on courses. Students just had to take the requisite number of classes, and they could pick from almost anything in the entire curriculum. Astonishing freedom. Harvard also advocated great freedom in elective capacity for its students to be able to follow their noses and take whatever they wanted to take. And the notion was it should be relevant to today's experience. And this was intersected with and supported by the Morrill Act and the Land Grant Acts that established land grant universities all over the countryside, at which students were expected to go and become proficient in, if it was an ag state, in agriculture, if it was a maritime state, in maritime technology, and so forth. Relevant, contemporary, industry-related considerations. But that ended up with a compromise, and the canonical parts provided what we now know as the core or general education curriculum. That's the canonical part. Everybody who goes through a college has to study some of the same stuff as everybody else, the general ed, the core curriculum. And then, of course, they can have a major in which they pick selectively from among many different topics for depth and technical enterprise, and their faculty mentors would know all about that thing. And so that's what we see today, is the product of these many years of single-minded focus on a canonical core, and then the much later breaking breadth that was established via the elective credits and via the core curriculum, or the major curriculum as we now know it. So I finally made my way through more than 2/3 of what I had in mind to say, and it brings us to the peak curriculum, because what we do here at the College of Idaho is unlike anything else in the nation. I get calls roughly once a month from a college somewhere in the country, typically back east, curiously, where they're calling and they often have their president or their vice president of academic affairs, a whole series of officials in the room. And they'll put it on speakerphone and want to have a conversation about what the heck we're doing here and how they might pull some of the parts and make them fit for their own college. And the reason I say that is to give you some evidence, at least by example, that this is not just unique to the state of Idaho or the Treasure Valley. This has achieved recognition nationally for being unlike the curriculum any other place. And I have to also acknowledge at the, sort of the description of the peak curriculum, it has its challenges. It's like a rotary engine or some such thing. Not many other people do it. It has its own quirks, but it also is distinctive in ways that give us advantage over so many other curricula nationally. And I can say, Brian Bava, we're here today, our terrific vice president of enrollment management admissions he oversees. He would say more of our students know coming in about our curriculum. The peak curriculum is one of the primary reasons they come to us, not just the great reputation of college, but the peak curriculum is one of the reasons they come. Very few other colleges can say that. The marketing advantages of our peak curriculum are severe. In a nutshell, the peak curriculum collapses the distribution, the electives, the core curriculum, the majors, into a single structure. All of that complexity gets boiled down into 4 areas. 3 of those are very traditional. In fact, if anything, they're beyond traditional. They're actually a little more aggregated and dense than you would find elsewhere. We have 3 academic peaks, or areas of organization. One of them is the natural sciences and math, so very scientific. One of them is social sciences, and for reasons not clear to anybody, history is in there too, fine. As we practice it, it's not a social science, but history's in there, social sciences and history. And then the third of the 3 is humanities and fine arts. So we've collapsed fine arts, performing arts, typically conceived to be music and theater, and forensics in there, debate, those folks are in there, along with conventional modes of art. All that constitutes the humanities and fine arts. So 1, 2, 3. And then we have a 4th peak of 4, which is the professional peak, professional foundations and enhancements. Those are the peaks. To get through the college, students have to fulfill each one of those 4 domains, at least with a minor. If they want, they can major, and they have to do 1 major. Some of them do 2 majors, but they have to do at least a minor. So there is no way the students can move through our curriculum without at least minoring in the sciences, and in humanities and fine arts, and in the social sciences. You see the point? This is not a college where students can avoid any of the breadth of the liberal arts domains. They are obliged not just to take a single class, and this is typical of many college curricula. So you go to a college, you'd have a bunch of check boxes, and you would take your class over here, class over there, you'd be done, easy. In our college, you have to do a minimum of a minor, which is a robust, thorough grounding in the college approach to that domain. So in each of those domains, and the jingle that's emerged from this is a major, a minor, in 4 years. And it works because far and away our students can graduate in 4 years as opposed to the longer period of time it takes so many other colleges to get their students through to commencement. The peak curriculum has been in place. It was initiated under President Hendren more or less the day he arrived. In fact, even before he arrived, he asked the faculty to make the college distinctive. And they took that challenge very seriously and undertook the production of a brand new and unique curriculum that is the peak curriculum. And so it's been intact now conceptually for about a decade. It's actually been installed for about 8 years in its current form. And it had some problems from the beginning that the faculty recognized very clearly. You'll find it in their memos and their dialogue with each other. I've read over the old letters that they sent. And they failed to get it done, to actually address those concerns and streamline the curriculum and fix some of the problems that were present from the beginning. And without going in much depth of problems, we finally have now seen that occur. Last fall and this spring, they've made major reform of the peak curriculum that's a terrific advance, and I can speak about it in these national conversations with great confidence as opposed to before where I felt like I had to lead with, well, let me tell you the problems and the drawbacks. So they've made great forward progress in reforming some of the operational challenges related to peak and hanging on to some of the real advantages of it. So I don't want to say a lot more about that, other than to say what I hope I've done in the span of the time that I've been speaking is bring you with a bit of speed over the span of 2,500 years of higher education curriculum, from the concept that it was a series of conversations that really were lifelong. Socrates chatting with Plato in the streets of Athens, later codified by Plato's school, the Academy, and then Aristotle's school, the Lyceum, all the way up to the University of Bologna in the 11th century and the Renaissance period, all the way fast forward to the late 19th century and 20th centuries here in the United States, landing us in the College of Idaho curriculum in the Treasure Valley. So what happened to you in your class 50 years or more ago has changed even so to this present period, where we've seen a kind of collapse of the breadth and an expansion of the representation from a single class to this consolidated major-minor model that is constituted by the P curriculum. The faculty are grinding ahead with great efficacy. I've never seen a faculty move as fast as they are, which is a little like saying that glacier is on the move. We are a one contentious, argumentative bunch, and I wouldn't change that about us. And the span of time in which they've made forward progress on this, which really is about a year, and more specifically in the last 3 or 4 months, they're an active and terrific faculty. They remain as they were when you knew them. Only the names and the faces have changed, but their identities are very similar. They're just as engaged, just as terrific as mentors, as leaders, as teachers of our students today, as I hope yours were in the year that you graduated. I'd like to stop there again. I know our time is short. I just want to thank you for chatting with me and hearing from me as I carry on about this. These are matters that the presidents and I and my colleagues on the senior cabinet think about and talk about every day. We take so seriously the sacred trust that you and others have given us in your legacy, in living the life that we had hoped for you as an institution, and training new students who will become in a moment or two members of this alumni group, join you in living lives that are larger and fuller and more humane than they would have been without the influence of higher education, specifically without the influence of the College of Idaho. Thank you very much. If you had a question, I'm glad to answer a question if there is one, but you need not have any. I would just like to point out Sylvia, who's behind the camera over there, is she is the instantiation, the very emblem of what we're talking about. Shia Muhammad, her partner, as I understand it, she's a first-year student, a freshman student, who in her first year at the College of Idaho has already advanced and has been selected from among 200 students now. We're down to 10 in terms of an entrepreneurial competition sponsored by our business program in working with external partners. And they're working on a program, a plan for training people in peace. And you want to say just something very briefly? Would that be appropriate? I'm so sorry to pull you from behind the camera, Sylvia.
So we're trying to fight harder to fight hate by bringing students.
Have her come here.
I'm so sorry.
Don't worry.
Put you on the spot.
So the idea we have is to fight hate through education, through leadership, and we want to bring students from conflict countries, because I myself am from a conflict country and I've been raised hating or like learning to hate someone across the border. So what we want to try to do is to bring students from those conflict countries together to learn leadership, and then afterwards go to their communities and have a mentorship program to make a change in their communities. So, yeah.
See, you could have dodged my speech entirely and just heard from her, because that is the product we seek. We don't produce anything except students. We produce citizens. That's our goal. And when we get it right, that's what we produce. And she's a first-year student, so who knows what she'll have achieved by the time she graduates from the College of Idaho. Are there any questions or comments that you'd like to make, please?
I was at Wilson School and we were having a fundraiser, and she was a cheerleader.
Yes.
I'm searching for words.
Yes.
Anyway, a cheerleader here at CMI.
Yes.
And she was over there doing community service,
Mhm, mhm. Yes.
And I said, "Where are you from?" And she said, "Oakland." And I said, "What brought you to the College of Idaho?" She said, "The Peak curriculum."
Yes. Oh.
Blew me away. I thought, bravo.
Yes, yes. Could you all hear the anecdote that she was visiting locally? Yeah, and that had a chance to chat with a young woman who happened to be a C of I student working in the community, doing service to the community, and she also is a member of our cheer squad. And you asked her, why on earth would you come from Oakland, where the young woman had come, to Idaho and the College of Idaho? And she said the peak curriculum. So it sounds like there's a, thank you very much. I'm delighted to know that. It confirms my hope, which is the curriculum is terrific. By the way, I would also add the peak curriculum resonates with the notion of our beautiful mountainous country here in the state of Idaho, as well as it's an acronym. We produce students who are professional, ethical, articulate, and knowledgeable. And so that we don't often unpack the whole acronym, but that's part of our thinking about this. So there are 4 peaks in the academic curriculum, and we want to produce students who themselves are professional, ethical, articulate, and knowledgeable, and it fits us, who we are, right? This is not a good acronym. It would not be a good curriculum for somebody in Arizona, say, you know, flat. Any other comments or questions? All right, we'll stop there. Thank you.